so we went away to a cabin in the woods to.
Like
we were
you
pretty
do
close.
when you're writing about murdering trees.
Exactly. And if you should have seen the cabin, that's a whole other story.
It was its
to
own
tell.
horror film. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. I slept with so much clothes on, socks, everything. Anyways, whole other story was the cabin itself. But every evening when we were done with our writing duties for the day, we would sit about and Charlie would have jokes that he'd want to punch up or get a new take on at least. And so what we would do though is we would each take turns, as I had just said before, being the arbiter. So one person would be the arbiter and set up the joke, and then the two others would write possible punchlines, and then the arbiter would choose which one of the two makes it. And we would just keep going in a circle who the arbiter is. And it was very, very fun. What I remember of it anyways.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to a special edition of Writer Real Talk with 3 other writers in the room. My very good friends Patrick Spencer, Anthony DeAngelis, and Charlie O'Leary, who have a show, I guess, coming up. This little thing called Axemas. Maybe you've heard of it on the channel before in one of the interviews with Charlie or with Patrick. But I've gathered them together so we can learn all about it and the process, because it's a very cool process that they went through in putting the show together, which is happening when, fellas?
December 1st through 18th. Sorry.
December 1st through 18th. So excited. So quickly for all of us out there, because maybe you don't know these faces yet, could each of you quickly just introduce yourself a little bit, how you identify as an artist, and what hats you might be wearing on the Axemas project? We'll start with you, Patrick.
Awesome. Hey everybody, I'm Patrick, he, him, and I use I do all sorts of like lyrical things was my main focus on this program. I did a couple of musical things, I did a couple of book things, but the main hat I wore was the lyrical hat. Charlie, tell us about yourself.
Yeah, I'm Charlie O'Leary. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a playwright. I live in Iowa City, where I just finished my MFA in playwriting at the University of Iowa. And yeah, I wrote the book for this show. I met these two folks as a lyricist in the BMI workshop. I do write lyrics as well, but I on this was primarily working on the book.
And hi, y'all. Anthony DeAngelis here. He, him, and I, if you can use the process of elimination here, did primarily music stuff. However, we all dabbled in each other's business a little bit here and there. But yeah, music department is my primary hat on this adventure.
Wonderful and lovely. And we'll get into where y'all crossed over a little later on. But so first and foremost, Axemas. If you could quickly describe what this show is / what it's about for everyone, I think that'd be great, because I don't know how I would describe it personally, except for it's a blast. So whoever wants to take it away.
It's not your
Really,
grandparents' holiday show.
Yes.
No, go ahead, Charlie.
No, I feel like we all have really different answers to this, maybe. I feel like I've been using sort of like, I have like a one-liner like pitch now.
Ooh,
that I've been like, which is an Axemas Story is a musical parody of 1980s slashers movies set on a Christmas tree farm and told from the perspective of the trees.
That's very succinct. That's very good.
Thank you. But it doesn't tell you anything about the plot, or the characters, or sort of like, and so, value in all things. What you guys describe, I mean, I feel like, how do you guys describe the show?
I feel like that's a pretty good summation of what we would say. Like whether we call it a send up or a parody or whatever verbiage you want to use, we're just poking fun at John Hughes movies. We're poking fun at 80s slasher movies. We're poking fun at 80s music. It's like all things 80s and all things Christmas are on the chopping block for this show.
The chopping block.
Yeah, and saying chopping block, it is indeed a dark musical comedy, which I pride myself upon, because I just I love. It turns out every show I write is dark. In thinking about all the shows I've written now, I don't think there's one that's just been like a light, fluffy thing. Not that this isn't light and fluffy. It's also just really dark.
I feel like we all just learned a lot about you, Anthony, that everything you write is dark.
It's about right.
So 80s Christmas horror. Where did this idea come from? How did this become a thing that's about to take place in a production? Like, what was the seed for this, and when?
I mean, the seed, as it were, was some years ago. I forget how many years ago this was, but weirdly, I thought to myself, wouldn't it be charming to have a children's book about the lowly? There's this Christmas song called Percy the Puny Poinsettia. I don't know if y'all have ever heard of this song.
No.
But it's Percy the Puny Poinsettia was hanging alone in dismay. If they had just kept him weta, he'd be a houseplant today. And it's all about the other poinsettias and like being feeling so sad for this one little kind of pathetic poinsettia. So I thought if this was a Christmas tree farm and you had one tiny Christmas tree that wasn't being picked, but then if you take that line of reasoning and extend it, it's actually really, really dark. And so it obviously could not live as a children's story anymore. And as we started writing it, we just realized like all the other things started to fall into place. Like, how do we jam in all the things? How do we jam in like a holiday show? How do we jam in the 80s? How do we jam in dark comedy? And it just became a bit of a soup. But really, like the seed of it started in a very different place than it finished. It's not where you start, it's where you finish.
Okay. So the rest of it, like the rest of the dressing just kind of came along as you were creating or talking about it? Or
Well, Patrick, do you want to say the next leg of this journey?
Yeah, I mean, so I think we went through multiple iterations of the show. So like the version that Anthony pitched to me, the puniest Christmas tree was like in league with the Christmas tree farmer, and so he was like selling out all of his fellow Christmas trees and getting them like chopped down.
All right,
I watched that.
And then Small Paul went on this like power kick and then was like the only tree left, and then at that point he was like, you realize that Small Paul was actually the Christmas tree from like the Charlie Brown Christmas, where like this like Charlie Brown-esque kid walks on the farm at the end of the show and it's like, I want that one's perfect, and then down goes Small Paul. So but we we couldn't figure out exactly how to sell that, and so we spent like Anthony spent a lot of time watching really terrible, like just terrible horror films. Like we watched like The Ice Cream Man, we watched Sleepaway Camp, like and so like we took a lot of these like the quintessential horror outline where it's like, oh, there's this gotcha in the first 5 minutes where something extreme happens, and then we go back to the regular plot, and then like there's like, you know, plot, excitement, plot, excitement. And so like we tried to follow that like general horror arc, but around Christmas trees, and like how can we sort of put those pieces together. And we got solidly far. We had a full draft of that show, and then at that point we Anthony and I were like, neither of us are really book writers. So we're like, what do we do here? And that was right around the time that you know, good old February, March 2020. And that's when we started our writing process, had to go entirely remote because of ye old pandemic. And so we're like, well, if we have to go entirely remote anyway, let's reach out to our good friend Charlie O'Leary, who lives in Iowa, so that we can, if we're writing remote, then he can write remote with us. And so that is when we reached out to Charlie, and he can tell you about leg 3 of the Axemas journey.
I love this.
Which was, they came to me with this idea, and I was like, obviously, this is the most, bananas idea I've ever heard, and so I therefore I must be involved. I mean, I think at that time you guys had written Log Jammin', which is sort of like an early, one of the first murders in the show, and then Growing Places, which is sort of Small Paul's like character establishment song. And I think that's all you guys had written of the music so far. You had a few book scenes as well of like the new sort of version of the show, which is like resembles the version that we have written today. Like the outline is like pretty similar to what you guys pitched to me, I think, with a few scenes cut, and like the general shape of it is like, Small Paul and Noelle like solve the mystery of like why the trees are disappearing, and they find it as Farmer Todd and they save the day. And like that is still roughly what happens. Oh, sorry, spoiler alert. I feel like that sort of gets whatever. But Small Paul in that version was sort of like, he was like a little Cartman, like sort of South Parky little like jerk, and like the characters were sort of very different people then, and I think it you guys are talking about the show being dark, and I actually think the show is like pretty sweet and like, especially in its like current iteration. And so it's funny. I'm like, oh, I wonder how much like that darkness and that sweetness is like us pulling against each other throughout this process, which is great. So yeah, they pitched this to me in like May with a few songs. I came on board and like we started meeting just once a week, and we would talk about what we were doing next. I would like write, a sort of word vomit version of the book scene in my bathtub that morning, sort of in a fit of desperation. And I hope none of that text has made it into the show. But they would, the two of them, Anthony and Patrick, would look at those scenes and sort of would craft songs that like would fit within them, and then I would recraft the scenes around the songs, and then we would sort of all dip into each other's stuff, and then a year later we had a draft. Wow. And that's the story of an Axemas Story.
Wow. So what's fascinating about that for me is obviously I know all of you, and I've known about this project kind of on the sidelines, but I didn't know that you'd been working on it for quite that long. And I guess I didn't realize that Charlie was brought on board after the pandemic started, which makes so much sense. I mean, when everything shifted to online, we were, not allowed to see each other for 6 months. But that's really fascinating. I love hearing how that started with a collaboration of 2, and then there was a realization for a need of a 3, and so you brought in the person, and the right person indeed. So that's really cool.
And 3 is always nice because then you get an arbiter,
Yeah,
because you could just say to yourself, well, I was right, but I've been outvoted, and you can sleep that night.
And we've done that in this show.
And that, I was like, we once
definitely
had a
have.
argument about a specific joke and how if it was too dark, and eventually one of us was outvoted, and it was good that we were able to resolve that moment.
The argument never dies, though. It just came up the other night when we were out with the director.
Really? Oh my god.
Oh yeah, I trot that out as much as I can.
Interesting. Now, what I want, we don't have to share this with the audience, but what I want is personally a list of all the jokes that have been cut, because I want to know how dark it got.
Pretty X-rated. Pretty X-rated for sure. Not that it's not now. Yeah. It's just a different kind of. It's different flavors of X-rated.
Yeah.
Some flavors made it in.
And honestly, I don't even know if we have a list of, do you have the joke game results still saved on your phone, Charlie? Do we have the full list of jokes that were pitched that just didn't make it into the show?
Wait, yeah, can we talk about the joke game a bit here?
Yes.
Because I love this so much. So what is it? What is the joke game?
Who wants to I can describe the joke game to the best of my ability. We went away to a cabin in the woods to we were pretty close.
When you were writing about murdering trees.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And if you should have seen the cabin, that's a whole other story.
It was its own horror film. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I slept with so much clothes on, socks, everything. Anyways, whole other story was the cabin itself. But every evening when we were done with our writing duties for the day, we would sit about, and Charlie would have jokes that he'd want to punch up or get a new take on at least. Mm-hmm. And so what we would do, though, is we would each take turns, as I had just said before, being the arbiter. So one person would be the arbiter and set up the joke, and then the 2 others would write possible punchlines, and then the arbiter would choose which one of the 2 makes it. And we would just keep going in a circle who the arbiter is. And it was very, very fun. What I remember of it anyways.
Yeah, and it was super successful because we didn't, like, whatever was voted on that night went into the next day's draft of the script. And so the next day we would read it and be like, oh, no matter if we all agreed if the joke worked, we would put it in the script and read it in context. And then if it didn't work, that same joke went back into the joke game for the next night, and we would like rework it. And we did new jokes that way. We rewrote lyrics that way. We like pitched lyrics for a couple of songs. Like, how can we make this lyric funnier? Like, we did it for like multiple different contexts throughout the show. It was like super successful.
Yeah, super worthwhile if you ever want to play the joke game with people, or just the game in general, because it does work for anything. It doesn't have to be jokes per se, as Patrick was just saying.
That is so cool. What I love about that is the group acknowledgement of, this is fine, but we know there's better. Let's pinpoint that moment, and then let's workshop it over and over and over until we get it right, or until we have something that we're more satisfied with. That is so useful.
Yeah, it really
Like,
was.
Sometimes the best option is the first option, but sometimes it's like the fifth option, and you sort of don't get to the fifth option because the first option was fine. And like this was a sort of way of making sure that we got to the fifth option, I think, and like we're able to sort of see all our what was possible. Yeah, there's some jokes I feel like from that game that I'm like, oh, I'm sad that didn't make it in, but also like I think that everything that like is in the show right now is like right for that moment in the show, and like sometimes a joke is just that. Yeah, the jokes that got cut just because like it was not the right like flow or rhythm in the moment, or like it just like made the scene a half beat too long. Like I will miss those jokes the most, but that's okay.
Well, we'll publish the joke game results one day.
That'd be great. I would love that.
in your memoir anthologies, for which I'm very excited. I can't wait.
Sort of like a
everything else
2-book
to
collection. It'll be called Finishing the, I don't know,
Joke.
Finishing the Joke. There we go. Thank you. See,
Perfect.
workshop. This is a collaboration.
There it is. Okay, so you utilized bad horror movies and generally have come together and workshop things, but how did you come to the types of sounds and tropes that get used in this show? Because I saw a reading of this. This was last December, yeah?
Yep.
Oh my God, a year, y'all. And I loved how ridiculously over the top 80s it sounded. There's just something delightfully nostalgic about it, while also just being really freaking funny. And I remember thinking to myself, like, how did they pinpoint these sounds? And also the jokes are very on point. Like, they're exactly what you want it to be for something that's parodying the entire idea of 80s, especially 80s like camp horror sort of idea. So how did you find this? Where did it come from?
I mean, musically speaking, you could go through the show, and I think almost literally, you can go through the show and look at each song, and each song definitely has, if you're looking hard enough, the song that I ganked from the 80s. Like almost certainly. Like Log Jam was one of the first things I wrote, but the reason that I was so desperate to write that song was because weirdly during the summer of 2020 I went way down a hair metal rabbit hole, and I got deep into hair metal. I was like, like I went home to hang out with mom and dad for a few weeks. I became one of those dudes that works out with the garage door open, like
You became an 80s film.
Yes, and like I'm there listening to like Motley Crue,
like high-waisted jeans and crop
oh
tops.
yeah, of course. And you gotta have like the bench press like in the middle of the garage. Like that was the look for me. And so like Log Jammin' itself, I think is just I mean it's not like perfect ripoffs. I do kind of just taking the sound world of these songs, but they are jumping off points. And I think Log Jammin' is probably Girls, Girls, Girls by Motley Crue. And then there's like It's Up to You, which is Bow Wow Wow, I Want Candy. Like I could go through all these songs and be like, they do have roots in something else. However, of course, as you know, how it progresses through the lens of theater in that prism, it's going to take a different shape, of course, because it has to serve this dramatic function. And not only are we going to pull from these sound worlds, but we also have to figure out in what ways does it move the story forward. And that inevitably takes the music in different directions. Like, for instance, in the middle of Log Jammin', it is like kind of a standalone hair metal song, but how we insert the scene into the middle of it and kind of inject the horror element. But anyways, like sound world wise, it's literally just me listening to lots of 80s songs and then learning a little bit about synthesis on Logic. Like I just got a synth. I downloaded a synth called Serum, which people might know about if they use Logic or they use Ableton or anything. And I kind of designed sounds. A lot of them I just designed to sound like 80s sounds, which was really, really fun because, I don't know, I really don't know too much about that world. And so it was like kind of a broad new horizon for me. Also the drums, just for fun. My dad is still like on like, I would say 60 to 75% of all the drum tracks are still what we recorded at his house because he also has an electronic drum set. Yes. And so we just plugged in to Logic while I was home. and he recorded like little snippets for all the songs, and we kind of rearranged it or quantized it and put it in different places. But a lot of it is still dead, which I kind of find fun.
I love that. That's fantastic.
So that's a little bit about the sound world of it.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, holiday elements too. You know, you got to throw in the jingle bells. You got to throw in like the hallmarks of the holiday music scene.
Yeah, the public domain elements of the holiday music scene.
Right. But of
Yeah.
course, very important.
But also like things that aren't just like specific 80s songs. Like we have a song that lives in the Danny Elfman camp of 80s music, which like it's hard
Right.
to pinpoint what Danny Elfman song it sounds like, because it just sounds like Danny Elfman et al.
Right.
So being able to find those musical moments and those like quintessential 80s moments, whether in music or joke, was like the right way to go about it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And from a book point of view, how did, because 80s movies just in general, no matter what the genre is, were very, very formulaic, and you have crossover of genre. So what did that process look like in taking the formulas and like zhuzhing them together? Because I think, Charlie, you made a great point earlier that the show does have a lot of heart. It is very sweet, while at the same time, it is a comedy and it is dark and there is horror elements and also Christmas. So like, how did all of this come together?
Honestly, okay, do you mind if I jump on that? Because like it's actually, this is like you guys' work, but I mean, like I said, they came to me sort of with an outline of the show, and it was riffing on sort of tropes around, or sort of like, what is sort of the structure of an 80s like slasher movie? What is the structure of like an 80s John Hughes movie? But like I think mostly just like, what is the sort of like classical structure of a musical? I think that this is a pretty traditionally structured musical, like and I think, you know, sort of it is intermissionless, but it is sort of in 3 acts. You know, the first 2, which would go before the intermission if there were an intermission, and the second and the third after. You know, we have character establishment songs sort of where you would expect them to be, and like charm songs sort of where you expect them to be. And I think we just sort of followed, you know, that like sort of hero's journey musical theater path. And I think the thing that's exciting to me about that is like sort of the fact that, at least in my opinion, sort of whose journey that was sort of shifted over the course of our writing. I feel like now it's more Noelle and Small Paulette's hero's journey than Small Paul's. Although they're like, I would still consider them co-protagonists. And I love that we can disagree on this, actually. But I think that, yeah, I ultimately, like structurally, I think that we just, you know, were able to rely on that classic musical theater structure because it worked really well for the kinds of stories we were telling, which might just speak to I mean, this might go back to the thing that you were saying about all of these stories, Michael, being really, there being sort of a generic quality to the like structure of them, or sort of a, like a, you know, there's a way that those stories are told. And there's a way that like many musicals are told. And I think that like, anytime you just sort of like engage with a structure that we're familiar with, we're just going to feel comfortable and familiar, and that will bring us to the places we need to get to if sort of the stylistic elements are all there. Which is maybe to say I don't, because like this, yeah, I don't know. There's like ways in which it totally doesn't follow the structure of a slasher movie. But like I don't know. I'm also just really lucky that they brought me an outline and I didn't have to. I sort of like got scene assignments and didn't have to do a lot of the like really fundamental creative thinking. It was great. I just got to be like, I don't feel like writing that one. Can we cut it? And they would be like, fine.
Hashtag collaboration.
Collaboration.
That's awesome. Yeah, you know, that idea of it being a classic musical theater structure, you're spot on. Because I saw last December, but then I was in that reading with you guys in August, and I remember having that thought as well of this is just a musical. This is just a really lovely musical that's been dressed up with all these fantastic colors and makes for a raucous and delightful time. So yeah, I love that you point out that the groundedness is what allows audiences to just go on the wild ride.
Yeah. No, I think that like buying into a tree sort of a story where a bunch of trees are talking would be a lot harder if we were also asking you to buy into like a really sort of unusual like structure and a really sort of like challenging like musical landscape and a really sort of, you know, I think that like allowing those things to be fun and somewhat familiar probably is what like makes the rest of it accessible at all. Maybe, I don't know, or maybe it yeah. And the last thing I wanted to say about this was this idea that like I think that nope, it's gone. Let's move on.
Patrick, I saw you unmuted. Did you want to add something?
No, I just wanted to add that like one of the things that came from Charlie, which I think helped add to the clarity, which also just adds another layer to the onion, is the role that our narrators, our Old Small Paul and our Noel play in helping guide the audience through moments that might need a little more clarity. They help be a touchstone from point to point, from moment to moment, in a way that a lot of like musicals do, in a way that a lot of movies do. It's like, let's give you two anchor characters that can help guide you through this story. So like whenever you're lost, let's turn to these two anchor characters to help explain how we got from A to B to C to D. So those
Patrick,
were
thank you so much, because that was what I was going to say, and that was literally, I was just going to, I think that they buy us a lot of permission to not have to follow through on every, like, because they anchor us in 2022 and not in the 80s, like, A, it doesn't have to be like purely accurate 80s, and like B, I think that like we get a lot more permission to like play because they're sort of like someone taking us along for the ride. And also just it's like doing the Princess Bride like thing, hopefully a little bit. Which is like, yeah, more 80s. So
more 80s.
Just 80s on 80s on 80s. That's very smart, yeah. And it works very, very well, I can say from experience, that like I feel comforted being like, aha, I know that if anything's gonna get confusing, they'll pull us back around. Like I feel well taken care of as an audience member. And I'm excited to see the new version. Haha. Could you speak to, because I think there's a question in a lot of people's minds about what makes something like a nod to a style versus like a parody of. Can you talk a little bit about what that difference is and how you found it with this show? Because it's all original. Like for all of you at home, the entire thing is fully original. They're not like taking things that already exist and changing the words. This is purely original material. So what is that? How did you find that?
I would love to hear your guys' thoughts on this, especially having just come off of like worked on a show that was a more direct parody. Like, what does it mean to like do a show that's like a parody of a genre, or sort of like sending up a genre, which maybe send up is maybe a more accurate, feels closer to what we're doing.
So like I would say what we did, or a lot of what we took from like approaching this material is like a lot of the send up of it came in sort of like outlining moments, like figuring out like if we start from a structure standpoint, we sort of grabbed ridiculous moments from other movies and like how can we like take what we want from these other projects and combine them into one thing, like creating this sort of like melting pot structure. And then I think when it came to like sending up those tropes, I think a lot of we just created a list of like 80s jokes, 80s references that we're just like, all right, where over the course of this outline, over the course of this script, does it make sense to throw a Baby Jessica in the Well reference? Where does it make sense to throw in a Challenger reference? Where does it make sense to throw in a Bill Cosby reference? Like
you just named the three most uncomfortable jokes. The three jokes I've like worked on the most to like make myself comfortable with. That's amazing, Patrick. You just nailed it.
You're welcome everyone. But so like where do you find like these moments that like in the 80s were like phenoms, and like now that we like we have a little bit of separation from them, how can we talk about them now in a way that like we didn't talk about them then? So whether or not you want to call that parody, it's like giving yourself permission to talk about things through the lens of the 80s now that you might not have been able to talk about in the 80s then. I don't know if that really lines up with where you're talking about parody, because I think we are like in a lot of ways, a lot of the parody we're doing is sort of parodying things that happen now. Like we have a mob mentality scene that breaks out, and the parody of that is our hook. We're like, oh yes, thoughts and prayers, like that will solve everything. So like that's the parody song we wrote. So I feel like, but that's not necessarily a parody of the 80s. That's just a parody of a sentiment that we still have to this day. So I think it's a matter of like finding elements that, yeah, that fit in to tell the story that we think is still funny and still sends up not just the 80s, but just different sort of you know, pop culture moments, elements, times, etc.
I think
Yeah,
also
as far
once...
as
Oh,
go ahead,
sorry.
Charlie.
No. This is very... I think once there was a sort of realization that like the big joke of the show is like they have no idea what's coming, that became like a really way that became a way to like clarify the entire like lens to which we were like doing all of these jokes. And I think also like what it meant to like be parodying this thing, which is like to say, oh, this is actually like it is ignorant in ways that it like is going to become aware of in a really brutal way very soon. Anyway, yeah, Anthony.
Yeah, it's interesting because it is kind of like we're not parodying per se like one specific thing, like as opposed to, as you referenced, that Patrick and I just came off of writing like an actual parody of a property, which is its own whole particular can of worms that I don't know that I understand for sure still at this point. But what was beautiful about Axemas, and what I think is always going to be beautiful in anything that I try to write, is that we are creating something that's completely original, but it's more kind of a collage or bricolage of things that we're just kind of collecting around themes of Christmas or themes of the 80s. So there was lots of ways to kind of incorporate different like mini send-ups, but the whole thing itself is not a particular parody. It's kind of, but it's interesting. It's an interesting question because I haven't really been thinking of it in that way, but there certainly are like tons of moments you can point to that are.
Yeah.
The whole log jamming scene, like it's the trope of like if you have sex in a horror movie, you'll be the first to die, and like that, yeah, it just like plays that out.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
It's parody because it's trees.
Yep.
Yeah, you know, it is interesting because we think about parody as being like take a property that exists and put a twist on it. But what you did is this is not a property that exists. You created this property, but then you pulled from all these things that do exist, and some of the jokes are more referential, like, oh, you sweet summer children, you don't know what's coming. And then other things are just like, oh, I recognize that because I've seen that in 1080s films, you know. And I think that's smart. What you guys did was very, very smart because, again, we recognize all of what you've put into this while still being like, I don't know where the story's going. Like, okay, here we go.
It's fun because I like people like I mean, to this day, there's still this huge uprise of like 80s nostalgia. People still want to live and love the 80s. And it's like when you actually hold a microscope to the 80s, I mean, censor warning, they were pretty fucked up. Like there was a lot that happened. Like, so it's interesting to sort of like literally hold up a light to like, oh yes, what a fun time to host a musical in the 80s. But like, let's also shine a light on all of the really dark things that did happen in the 80s. So I don't know whether you would like whether that lives in satire land or parody land or send up land, but yeah, that's part of what we're doing in the show.
Yeah, it's a real combo platter of all those things for sure.
Yeah.
Was it you, Anthony, that talked early on about like the 80s as like the last decade, and sort of like the 90s was like the 80s part 2 and the 2000s was like the 80s part 3, and just sort of like we're just experiencing the consequences and sort of repeating the same thing, like this like capitalist sort of like nightmare over and over.
Yeah, I think that's the kind of one of the things that first interested me was just kind of how it's, you know, history has become a bit of an Ouroboros. It seems like just eating its own tail over and over again, and feel like we haven't really, like, I think about this a lot with music, how the 50s to the 60s to the 70s, though of course it's not like here is this style and then it absolutely changes. It is gray and it is process oriented. But I think I would argue that post 80s into the 90s and beyond, we've gotten more and more prone afford just kind of repeating or rehashing or recreating sounds that have come before and aren't so much kind of creating some like things entirely new or entirely new, some symbolic orders to build music on or build any kind of art on. And so it is a theme that I was thinking about a lot when we got into this. Like that's not but how that cashed out. I mean, this is still like a frothy dark comedy. It's not like we're focusing on that, but it's one of the interests for sure of that time for me.
Yeah. Well, I think speaking as someone who has consumed the material, I was both surprised and delighted by how much the piece made me think. Like, even sitting there watching ridiculous things happen on stage with some excellent jokes that were making me belly laugh, I was like, oh, why is this still today? Like, where did we go wrong? How is this so applicable to the 80s and yet so applicable to literally right now? Which I think is just a testament to what you guys have created and the thought that you did bring to it. You brought thought and care, and like, I don't feel preached at. I just feel like, okay, this will stick with me for a hot sec. I'm gonna think about this.
I wonder how much of that is just like inevitable, that like even if we tried to avoid doing that or like any sort of like messaging or sort of like saying anything at all, like it was just, we were writing a show during the pandemic and like we all have opinions on things, like it was going to happen.
Yeah.
Anyway,
it's a good question. All right, so talk to me about your collaboration process, because all three of you now have said you've had your hands in other things other than the thing that you're labeled on the script as being. So how does that work? Where were contributions made, and what did that look like?
Well, some of it, I mean, for me anyways, is just vestigial. Being that Patrick and I kind of, when we started this whole thing, it was just Patrick and I meeting once a week. We'd go to a bar and we'd talk about, okay, we've got this idea. Then we started to create this outline. And then once the pandemic really started taking shape, then we started really actually writing some of the book scenes as well. We wrote a couple of the songs. So some of it is just kind of trickled down because it's not, of
Like
course, the
economics?
Lion's share like economics. Yes. The lion's share, of course, of book is indeed Charlie's, but every once in a while I'll go, ooh, I've got a little piece in there. So part of it was just practical in that aspect. And then another part of it again is like the joke game that we were playing, so that we've kind of put little stamps here and there all over each other's like departments, which is to me is beautiful and I love.
and I think like there was an ease of like, I think like if Patrick needed to tap in on dialogue mid-song or setting up a song, or like if I sort of realized that I changed a plot element that like required a lyric change, like I would usually write the bad version and Patrick would write sort of the version that we would use. But like, I think there was a sense that was allowed, that we could like do stuff like that and trust that, the other person, the sort of department head would like make sure that it like did what it needed to do, but like that, yeah, we weren't going to be really precious about anything.
Yeah, we each had our own sort of wheelhouse that we sort of, department head, like Charlie put it. But yeah, it like joke game allowed all of us to like pitch jokes, to pitch different book elements. I know that like when Anthony and I were in the songwriting process, sometimes like we wrote most of the show in Logic. So we would just like write, like Anthony would be like, here's the beat, here's like how everything looks. Sometimes there'd be a melody, sometimes there wouldn't be. So like a lot of times I would set lyrics to exactly what Anthony wrote. Other times there would just be a groove and he'd be like, go to town. So I could play around with like writing a couple of melody pitches. At the end of the day though, I would give Anthony a pitch, and as music head, he would say, cool, yeah, let's use that. Or I'm going to do a variation on that and like make it my own. But that I think allows for all of us to take a little bit of ownership over many different elements. Like there are lyrics that Anthony wrote, there are lyrics that Charlie wrote, there are lyrics that I wrote. There's some musical elements that I wrote, most of the music elements Anthony wrote. Like, and a couple of bit of like book that like all of us had to say in. So it's nice that we can all feel a little bit of ownership over most of the show together, which is really cool.
Yeah, and it's a real blend. It's like, it's like when you write something on a piece of paper and then you erase it, but write something right over the top of it. And then you do that over and over again. There's a name for that. There's like a fancy name for that. But that's like kind of what it is. And then suddenly you've just got bits and pieces kind of baked in.
I love that. There's oh, there's puppy. There's a beauty in the fact that the three of you were so comfortable with one another and going into the process where you could do that, because I know that there are a lot of writers out there who are scared of a collaborative process like that because it feels like you're giving up your control, you're giving up your ownership over certain things. But it sounds like the three of you found a really lovely balance between, hey, let's experiment and play and let's do what's necessary for the piece, and also here's the person who has final say. And I think that's great. It's unique and delightful.
Yeah, it worked out. I mean, it worked out very well, and it's been a joy, such a joy to write it. But also it helps though. It helps. Like, I don't know, my personal thinking on anything I write is always like, oh, this is all just garbage. And hopefully somebody else likes it. But it makes me, I don't know, I never mind if somebody's like, can we redo this? It's rare that I get really overly precious about that, because I always think it's kind of fun to just do a new take and write something else. Like, any excuse to write something new is great. And so being in a I don't know, being in a good collaboration often, I think it inspires the ability to do that in me even more, which has just been great.
Yeah, especially when you have people who are comfortable working, just like figuring out how to make a song work. We have one song that we've in this show that we've rewritten at least 7 times now, like whether it's lyric changes, book changes, getting into it, like reshaping a verse. There's there's a bingo song that we've been trying to cut for at least a year, and it just keeps it keeps sneaking its way back into the show. So like it's like I think a lot of that is because we're all comfortable figuring out ways of like, how can we make each other's work better. And at the end of the day, like that's what the show is like, nobody's being precious, because we know everybody's just trying to make everybody else's work better for the sake of the show.
Yeah. I love that so much. Also, I love all of you, so like my heart is swelling 3 times. So can we talk a little bit about the current thing that is in rehearsal that's about to be on the stage in, a few weeks? What is this process for you right now in putting up the show, especially because Charlie is still not in New York at this moment? And also, can you talk to us a little bit about your cast and creative team?
Yeah.
I'm gonna let you guys take it because I'm in Iowa, and I love everyone who's on our team, but I don't get to see them as much as you do.
Yeah. Go. Do you want to take this, Patrick?
I mean, it depends. Yeah, I mean, where would you like to start? I mean, I think it's super exciting. So we're opening up in what, 2 weeks? 2 weeks from Thursday is opening night, which is just wild. The show's gonna run from December 1st through December 18th. But we were lucky enough to just like, we've assembled a cast of people just through like our network of folks to like, and like it's so fascinating to see that like so much of like being in New York is like the theater family that you create, and just seeing the cast and crew that we've thrown together here, like I'm really sort of proud of the theater family that we've created. Jake Beckard is directing. He was recommended to us by a good friend of the show, Ivy Lowe. But then with Jake, we were introduced to McKenna Goodrich, who is like associate directing and choreographing the show. So being able to have both a director and an associate director and a choreographer, where the two of them can just get together, and no matter who can be at rehearsal, they've like their collaboration is strong enough that like there has always been a leader of the ship in the rehearsal room, which is just awesome. And then to see this, like we've got this amazing blend of we've got Broadway caliber talents in the show. Like Carissa Bertles is like the Carissa Bertles, like love me some Carissa. And then we've got but we also have some younger talent on the show, like Jesse Joacca, who is from Arizona, who we were only privileged to get a chance to work with because of McKenna. So it's like, we have this connection to this, we get other connections to this. I can give a whole rundown of the cast. Luckily, we're lucky enough to work with Curry Whitmer as our old small Paul. We get to work, like I said, with Jesse Joacca as our small Paulette. Angelo McDonough, who I've had the privilege of working with on multiple shows. He's coming back to work with us again as small Paul. Saul. Richard LaFleur, who I worked with like 10 years ago in summer stock, is joining us as like our Buck and Chuck track on this show. We were introduced through McKenna again to Lucy Rossi, who's going to be covering, she's like our Fern Patrice. So Richard and Lucy cover essentially like all of our bully trees who are working, like they play multiple different trees. We've got Ben Schrager, who we were only lucky enough to meet because of our connection with Jake, the director. So like this is more just like more worlds combining. Anthony and I, we worked on a Saw the Musical. Shout out to Saw the Musical. But we saw RJ Christian in auditions for Saw, and we're like, he was incredible. Let's bring him in to work on this show. Please, I want to make sure I'm not forgetting anybody's names. So like, we've got Rose Ann Rabutt, who Charlie and I worked on a production of Two Star Motel years back. Brought her in for the reading and then brought her back onto this show. Mark Munoz is another one who's in our ensemble that we met through McKenna, and we got to bring him into the show. I think
and then there's Kelly Whitley,
Kelly.
who's Kelly, who's a dear friend, but going back like years, and and of course I met her through another songwriting team I work with, of Kristen Benzina and Jess Pensius. And Kelly and Kristen are like old friends. I knew she did a lot of improv comedy, and I just love her. So so she came on board as well. And then also our music director Sarah Linger, who we met through Saw, because she happened to be music directing Saw. We loved her work, and she was brought over here. And then also the person that's helping me do the tracks for this also did Saw, but also orchestrated and did tracks for Prince's New Pet, named Zach Hansen. He's been fantastic. So it's kind of fun how, I don't know, it's like a glacier. I feel like theater. It's like you just like pick people up along the way as you kind of creep forward, which is the best, and it just becomes
or
a
the
bit
blog.
of a family.
You know, if we're going horror film wise, we're just like
or the
blogging
blog.
our way. We're picking up more people.
Yeah, absolutely. But that's kind of one of the lovely things, because over time you've got this little community all your own that you do theater with, and hopefully this just leads to more of these folks appearing in shows that we write.
Yeah. We were lucky enough to even get into the Players Theater because of Aaron Quinlan, who was a BMI friend who pitched our show to the folks at the Players Theater, and the folks at the Players Theater were like, come do the show. So just it's that whole community vibe. And yes, we are sad that Charlie is all the way in Iowa, but he'll be here for opening night. So if you come to opening night, you'll get to see Charlie O'Leary in the flesh. He'll be there. Yeah, it's been quite an experience, and we're really blessed to be able to work with the people that we're able to work with on this show. They've been fantastic.
Are you going to be here you're going to be here through that Saturday, Charlie, right? The 3rd?
My plan is to be here from Wednesday night, Thursday morning. Like I'm planning to just miss tech is sort of my vibe.
Yeah.
And then sort of roll in just in time to make sure that all the work is done, and then stay through the 4 performances that weekend. I kind of want us to get 4 times. I feel like if we're gonna continue working on it, I want to learn as much as I can.
I mean, I only ask because you should come to my holiday party on the 3rd, I hope.
I love this. I love that I'm getting an invite live during an interview,
Well, you should have the invite in your email, but
wow.
Not sure you've responded yet. Yeah.
I have not. I certainly have not. And it's my inbox is sort of
Michael's responded.
I did. I'm going.
Yeah.
See y'all there.
Good.
Love it.
I'm going right after seeing Axemas on that Saturday night.
Yeah, it's perfect. I'm hoping some of the cast comes on up. It'll be nice.
That'll be fun. I can't wait.
I love it. I love that everyone involved in this show either was a friend already, a recommendation through someone who you're working with currently, or was someone you've worked on a project previously. Like, that is the beauty of the theater community. Like, just the fact that you never you're always gaining more. You're never you're never trimming the hedges.
Nice.
Yeah.
Good.
Mediocre at best. I'll work on my tree puns, but you guys
we can joke game it. We'll figure it out.
Perfect. Thank you. Just put it in the hat for later. All right. So what should people expect when they buy their tickets? Because they're going to buy their tickets. They're going to come to the Players Theater, which is downtown. And what should they expect of the show? What, like, do we need to dress up as trees or something? Like, is there a gimmick here?
I wouldn't mind. That would be
Okay.
great.
Yeah, we sort of would, celebrate that a lot. And I was going to say we would give you a free ticket, but I don't know. We just sort of would celebrate it. I think there's actually, so we were in a design meeting the other day, and I think there's sort of a concept where there's a little bit of a separate, we're sort of creating a proscenium in this black box where there's a separation between the human world of the audience and the true world of Treetown. So I actually, I think that dressing up as a human would actually be very on brand for the show.
I'll do my best.
But not like Hannibal Lecter style, because
Oh God! Okay.
Don't dress up as a human. Just
yeah,
show up
I
as a
guess
human.
he sort of dresses up as a human.
Yeah. Which, sort of on brand in a different way. More 90s horror. Yeah.
Where can people find all of the information? Where can they follow you for content? Where can they buy their tickets?
Yeah, so if you check out an axemasstory.com, you can see our log jam and lyric video, which is a blast. You can there's a link there to tickets. Since you watched this video, when you go to your ticket portal through like an axemasstory.com, use code 2 weird 4 too long. It's a joke from the show. You'll get it later. So too weird for too long. Enter that promo code to get 50% off your tickets. Because Michael Ratty sent you. You'll get all the information to the show. Also, feel free to. I know. Twitter is on fire right now, but you can follow us at anaxemasstory.com. You can also find us at anaxemasstory.com, at an Axemas Story on Twitter, at an Axemas Story on Instagram. We're also an Axemas Story on Facebook as well. You can find us on all of those places. We're still setting up our Twig Talk yet. We just haven't gotten around to it. But sooner rather than later.
And also, if you don't feel like, putting in Tweak Talk, putting in promo codes and the like, which of course you're welcome to do, we're also on Today Ticks, and we're on a couple of those apps as well. We're on other things as well, right?
Yeah, Today Ticks and Gold Star, and if you got TDF, look on TDF. They're like $15 tickets, so check us out on TDF.
Oh man, I'm gonna put all these in the description below. So people have all of the access, all of the
the Axemas access.
Ooh.
Yeah.
That one definitely beats, trimming the hedges.
Thank you. I get better with time, I promise. Wonderful, awesome. This is so fantastic. Thank you all for having this conversation. I've been very much looking forward to this since I mentioned it in August, and I'm just so happy that we're finally here and the show's happening, and I get to see it again in a few weeks. So
come get in the holiday spirit down in the village.
Yeah.
Yes, please. And also, if there are ways that we can follow each of you personally, just send them my way, and I'll put those in the description below as well, because you're all wonderful people who make brilliant work all the time, and people should know you. So
thank you so much, Michael.
Oh my
This was a pleasure. Yeah,
this has been wonderful.
And for all of you at home, do make sure to visit an axemasstory.com and get your tickets, or through any of the ways below. And I hope to see you all there. So thanks everyone for being here, and I'll see you next time. Bye.
Thank you all for being here with me today, and I'll see you again soon. Cheers.